exclusively on Secular Media Network. This is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, and today on the show we are having a discussion about asexuality. A couple of weeks ago on the show, we had a discussion about sex and sexuality as atheists and queer folks, and there was a distinct lack of discussion in that episode about asexuality, not because I don't think it's a valid topic, but because I think it's a topic that kind of deserves its own show, because I feel like in a conversation about sex, people who aren't interested in sex or have an interest in sex that's different than most people do, I wanted to make sure that those people didn't get talked over in the conversation. So today this is what we're doing the episode about. I have two guests who both identify as asexual, and we're going to have a conversation about it. Jeni, welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Thank you very much, Callie. Appreciate your time.
And Isabelle, welcome.
Hello.
And
Thank
Isabelle,
you for having me.
And Isabelle, if you wanna say the names of your podcast, they're in French, and I will butcher them.
Yeah, so I'm hosting Moi Asexual, which is me asexual, and also I'm co-hosting Le Monde Merveilleux du Scepticisme, which would be the wonderful world of skepticism.
Outstanding. Well, so let's go ahead and jump into it here. If either of you would like to take over and just kind of define what asexuality is, and maybe even more importantly, what it isn't.
Yes, I actually can lead into this by saying that there are a lot of myths surrounding individuals when they try to identify themselves as asexual. A lot of people will automatically think that asexuals are all virgins, which we are not necessarily. That we are all prudes who cannot deal with having any kind of like dirty jokes or like making any dirty jokes or being around anybody who is sexual, which is also not true. And a lot of times they also assume that we cannot experience romantic love. And that is also not true. There is a spectrum on that as well. Asexuality is, again, a sexual preference. It's not a gender identity. It's not anything involving just romantic love. It's really just asexuality. So those are a couple of myths that I would like to dispel on this show.
Good. And Isabelle?
Actually, asexuality, to me, it's like the lack of sexual attraction towards pretty much anybody. There's a spectrum inside the asexuality. So you have demisexual, you have gray sexuals, which sometimes can experiment sexual attraction, but asexual doesn't experience sexual attraction towards anybody.
Right. So the use of the word spectrum is the thing that interests me when talking about asexuality, because obviously, I mean, none of us like to be, language Nazis or anything like that, but the term asexual definitely has a connotation towards literally none. But there is a spectrum on which, like I know some people, for example, will say that they don't experience sexual attraction unless there's a strong romantic attraction involved. Like is that right? Am I missing something there?
They're much demisexual. That's kind of people who would identify as demisexual.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So talk to me about when you have conversations with people and the topic of sex comes up. Is this something that you feel comfortable just coming right out and saying like, yeah, I'm asexual. It's, sex isn't really a big deal to me. And what kind of reactions do you get from people?
I'm super comfortable. I always say it right away, but actually I identify more as demisexual, even though I have more in common with asexuals. But yeah, I say it right away, and the reaction is most of the time that doesn't exist, or have your hormones checked, or do you have the best one, have you been raped?
Oh my gosh.
Nope. So
That's awful. Jeni, have you had similar experiences to that?
No, I'm actually very comfortable being in conversation with people who are talking about their sex lives or their sex activities. I usually just listen. And the fact, I am not a virgin. Like, I have had encounters, and I think a lot of people who may identify as asexual realize that they are because they felt the need to engage in these activities just because, peer pressure, whatever, they're very much consensual. My encounters are very much consensual. But when they actually happen, you realize this is uncomfortable for me and I really don't want to do this again. So I can definitely discuss the situations I've had. I find that if I do go to the point where I say I am asexual, I don't typically experience this kind of attraction. The conversation can get a little bit interesting. But if I just say, oh yeah, that first encounter doing this thing, yeah, that was really weird. If I just leave it there, it's usually completely fine and I don't have to go any further than that.
Gotcha. Well, because everyone's had, anyone who's had sex has had awkward sex probably, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, if you're comfortable sharing, what are, some specifics? Like if you jump into saying like, well, yeah, I'm asexual. I don't experience sexual attraction in that way. Okay. Yeah. What are things that people say to you? Because I imagine it gets pretty ridiculous.
This happened to me just a week ago. I was just hanging out at a place where I normally hang out with friends. And I was like, you know what? I've kind of had a couple drinks. I'm feeling kind of competent right now. So when somebody approached me to try to hit on me, I was like, yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm asexual. I just don't. And this man was telling me, well, I think I can change that. I think that's very, just reading what I've read in like asexual forums and whatnot, I think that's a very common response that many people who identify as asexual get along the lines of probably what anybody who identifies as homosexual, transsexual, whatnot, they may also get as well because they're outside of that norm, right. That somehow they're broken and somebody who is within that norm can correct them. And you have to just set them in their place and say, no, I'm not broken. You can't correct me because I'm not broken.
Yeah, well, because that's literally what is how many times I've seen people say, especially to people who are bisexual or pansexual, like, well, I'm going to be the one that's going to help you pick a side, wink, wink, and
no, I'm sorry. I don't think that D is going to make me want to do it. It's not going to happen like that.
Right. And so let me ask, Isabelle, you mentioned that you identify more as demisexual. So that means that there's not a complete lack of sexuality there. So just in the conversations that you've had, and obviously, if I'm running up against any boundaries feel free to push back. I don't want to put you on the spot and make you feel you have to share something that you don't want to share. But when it comes to actually, having intimate relations with people, when those things do happen, does it look differently than like for example, a lot of times sex between trans people looks a whole lot different than sex between cis people. And is there a similar difference in the way that sexuality is experienced when it is experienced, or does it look relatively similar, or what's your experience with that?
Well, in my case, I'd say it's pretty similar, but the thing is, I realized that asexuality was a thing only a few months ago, like in June or something like that. And I pretty much forced myself my whole life to have sex because I thought that was that's what you're doing when you're in a relationship and right. You love your boyfriend, so you don't want him to leave, you don't want him to cheat on you, so you force yourself to have sex even though you're like, it's boring.
Right.
So, but if I knew, like when I was younger, because I'm 39 now, that would have changed a lot. I'm pretty sure it would have changed my whole sex life. And I have a boyfriend right now, and I came out to him as a demisexual. We were together like for the last 2 years, and so the sex didn't change that much. It's just I'd say less frequent because now I realize that I'm not broken. I don't have really a problem, so I don't feel that I have to force myself anymore, so I don't. And he's very patient.
Right. That's important. So you brought up two different things here, and I definitely want to tackle both because I think they're important. One is the subject of relationships with other people, because I actually wasn't able to find a lot of data on how many people there are who identify as asexual. So, but I think it's probably safe to say that the number is smallish. So
it will be 1% of the population. What we have so far, pretty much.
Around 1 or less than 1. Well, at least here in the U.S., it's between 1 or less than 1.
So talk to me about navigating relationships in that way, because obviously, like you said, having a lack of sexual attraction is not at all the same as having a lack of romantic attraction. So can you kind of go through what that looks like?
Yeah. As demisexual, I have a little bit of sexual attraction towards some people, but not all of my ex-boyfriends I had that sexual attraction. So for most of them, I just had the romantic attraction.
Right.
And so you feel like you want to cuddle while watching a movie, and you want to be close to the person. Maybe some kissing, but
well, what I'm kind of getting at is, does that kind of thing end up causing conflict? I mean, you said before, that you hadn't kind of even come out to yourself as asexual. So you had sex with people, even though it wasn't necessarily a thing that you so much wanted to do or were interested in yourself. So what I'm wondering is if that kind of thing causes friction. Or that kind of thing is more what I'm curious about.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So definitely it causes friction, because when you're in a relationship and with a sexual person, which I always was, the sexual person expects you to have sex with him, and when you force yourself, at one point you cannot force yourself anymore. It just gets too much. And to me, I got at a point every single time, every single one of my relationship was like that. I got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And so the sex was less and less and less and less frequent. And the guy is like, okay, what's going on? I want the sex to stay at least once a week at least, and I don't think I can do that anymore. And then the relationship slowly falls apart.
Gotcha. And Jeni, what's your experience with that?
I find the fact that I'm asexual is the reason that I have not been in any long-term romantic relationships in my entire life. I am 37 years old, and I really have not been able to be in a long-term relationship because I always feel like somebody is expecting me to deliver a certain thing on my side of the relationship. So maybe, and I will admit that I have had romantic attractions to people. I am not aromantic. I can have that sort of, I care about you, you care about me, we care about our goals and our emotions and things like that. But I may not want to fulfill a certain need. But I really think that has kept me shying away from people. And it has also allowed others, I say, we're just hanging out at a bar. And I'm being social because I am a social person. I'm a very extroverted person. I like to talk to people. I like to make connections and network. Other people may think, oh, you're just trying to get in their pants. You're trying to play this game. You're trying to do this thing. You know what you're doing. And I'm like, no, I'm really don't have an ulterior motive at that. So it's either that a lot of what I do is misconstrued as trying to get with somebody, or that when I am romantically attracted to somebody, I shy away because I don't want to eventually have to cross that bridge.
God, that sounds really tough.
Yes, but I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine with being single and 37. I've been on my own since I was 22. My parents are deceased. I'm okay. Mm-hmm. I'm fine. I've always been a very independent person, so I will navigate those waters as it will happen.
Well, that's awesome. And I guess, I don't know, maybe it's unfair of me to just assume that it's tough, because what I'm kind of doing is painting my own experience into things. And, when I'm in situations like that, and I am very much a sexual person, But, you know, when I would step in and try to get relationships with people, always in the back of my head was they're going to find out that I'm trans and think I'm disgusting. So like, there was a lot of like, I very much want this, but there's this one thing that's probably going to mess it up, so I might as well not even try.
Yeah,
so
and it may be the same way with asexual people and having a romantic attraction and saying like, hey, I care about you, but there are certain things I really just don't want to fulfill. And if I really care about you, I may be willing to do that in a consensual way, but like, I really don't want to, because that's kind of invading my space.
Right. Yeah, sure. So, in the other thing, you know, aside from partner relationships that you brought up a minute ago, Isabelle, was the idea of, you know, of having to come out and even coming out to yourself as asexual, because, you know, there are people for whom lack of sexual attraction is a problem. If I all of a sudden lost my sex drive, that would indicate a problem for me, because I'm a very sexual person, and that's something that's important to me, and it's an important dimension to my life. But for some people, it's simply just who they are, and that's okay. And I have to imagine that in the simultaneously hypersexualized and hyper repressed society that we live in, it's got to be really tough to figure out the difference between the two and which one, like which side of that you fall on.
Right. Yeah. I had no clue that I was demisexual / asexual. I really started to questioning myself after like 2 people asked me like specific questions like about my personal fantasies, and I'm like, well, I have none. And asking also about like, how come you never look at any people, never think anybody's hot, or never talk about, you know, people in a sexy way? And I'm like, well, that's not normal. What? You know, you're not like that.
Right.
And then I started to look for information. I watched the documentary Asexual on Netflix, which is pretty good. But at first I was in total denial. Yep. I was like, no, of course I'm not asexual. Come on, that's not me. And then listening to the documentary, I'm like, oh well, that kind of looked like me. That's very similar. And then I made some more research on the internet and find out about demisexuality, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. So I have way much in common with asexual people than with sexual people. Is it hard? Sorry, can you go back with your question again?
Well, talk about that moment for me, because I know for me, when I found out that there was a word for the way that I felt about my gender and the way that I felt about my body, like immediately that was oh my God, there are other people who feel this way. There's a name for this. You know, talk to me about that moment. What was that like for you?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. When I realized like that demisexuality was exactly the definition of how I was feeling, that was like awesome. Like, I think like the most awesome moment in my whole life. It's like if all the pieces of the puzzle came together, and I could understand like my whole past life, right? Everything I did in the past, why I was like that. And so it was just totally fantastic to know that. And I came out to pretty much everybody right away.
Because you were so excited that you finally had an answer for this. That's awesome. And Jeni, what about you?
Honestly, I've never had any of those huge aha moments, either with regard to my asexuality or my atheism. Like, I've identified as atheist for about 15, 16 years, and as asexual for about 10 years. And it's just a thing that I kind of casually came across. You mentioned the documentary that was on Netflix. That was with the founder of Avon, which I'm not a member of their forums, but I have visited their site, and I know it was him and his friends out in San Francisco, and they went to like this pride parade and everything. So I kind of started like realizing Avon was a thing, and I'm like, I guess that's my thing. It just became like a part of an identity. I really never had an aha moment. I'm just a rational person. I'm like, okay, I guess that's part of me. But I never felt the need to just like blast it from the rooftops. The same thing with atheism. Right. So if the topic comes up, I'll be honest about it. But in the grand scheme of things, most people you meet casually or even like some good friends don't really care about that. So it's part of you. If the bridge gets crossed, you address it. And if it doesn't, you don't.
Fair enough. I mean, and it's interesting how, different people experience different things like that, because I actually had, I had a person contribute to the show in a couple of episodes ago. And, when I grew up with, my struggles with my own gender, I very much internalized that there was something wrong with me, that like I had to be the only one, that this is wrong. The way that I feel is not okay. And the other person who contributed actually said that they grew up just thinking that everyone was unhappy with their gender, and that was just a normal part of the human experience. So it's interesting to hear that same sort of dichotomy of experience here. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm thinking it may be something like more different with people who like have a disparity with their gender, because it may be more of an outward appearance thing.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Just because you're asexual, you're atheist, like nobody can tell that. I mean, like I am a cisgendered female. Like I was born female. I identify female. So that may definitely make things easier for me to just kind of keep on the down low.
Brainstorm Podcast presents the Shift to Reason, Saskatchewan's first secular conference. It's happening on April 30th, 2016, and features some great speakers that include Seth Andrews, Nate Phelps, and Leveda Leaning, along with others. This one-day event in Regina includes lunch and a VIP afterparty with the speakers. Tickets are available at shifttoreason.eventbrite.ca and start at $95 for early bird tickets, with student pricing and limited VIP tickets. Keep up to date with the conference on our Facebook page, facebook.com/shifttoreason.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Ayame for increasing their pledge. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. And so you brought up atheism, so let's kind of go there for a second too, because it's a very interesting dichotomy in our culture where some sectors are very, very hypersexualized to an unhealthy extent, and some sectors are incredibly repressed to an unhealthy extent, and in so much of that is driven by religion and the reaction to puritanical religious ideas. So and I guess I should ask if either of you had, a religious upbringing, or if any of that sort of played a part in your own journey of, realizing who you were or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I will definitely start with this. I was raised in the Catholic cult. Catholic church.
Yeah.
Hey, we have a very charismatic leader who wears funny clothing. What can I say?
Right. Yeah. It fits.
I was raised in the Eastern Orthodox, the Ukrainian Catholic Church. And at first I thought that was just, a part of like wanting to, you have to be a virgin before like you get married. And then I reached like the age of consent, and I was like, well, I don't really want to get married. Like I kind of did what I did. I really didn't care about it. So I didn't. And at that point, I was in college. I was already like not believing in religion. So I realized it really probably wasn't part of that whole Catholic guilt thing. I hadn't gone to church since I was like 13. I did when I was younger. I went through all the sacraments, all the little rituals and everything, but I really hadn't gone to church for a while. I didn't really think it was that much of a part of me. But I still kind of felt the same way. I'm like, I could be a nun. Like, they would be totally envious of me. I could be a nun. Nobody would even care.
Because it's not even a struggle for you, right?
I want to cry every day, you know? It's like, I want to read Bertrand Russell every day. Like,
right.
That's cool, but can we have an atheist convent? That'll be awesome.
So let me make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So when you were growing up as part of this Catholic upbringing, you kind of just saw your lack of sexual desire as kind of like just being part of a good Catholic, right? Like you figured like
normal. It was normal for a good Catholic girl to
like
not
maybe this will just be a thing that comes along when I decide to get married or whatever. Like was it kind of that thinking?
If you have no idea what the Catholic Church is, like, we love our Blessed Virgin Mary. Like, they hold like the Mother of Christ up to like this ideal, like she is her own saint. Like, we are definitely not a monotheistic religion. We are pantheistic. We have tons of saints. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, the BVM herself, is like
she gets her own abbreviation. That's when you know it's real.
So it's just, which is like, well, she's the Blessed Virgin Mary. It was a virgin birth. Like, that's a thing. Like, women shouldn't really want to have sex. So that's fine. And then when you start moving away from that belief system and realizing that, sexuality is a very normal part of being a human being, but you still don't feel the need to do it, to go down that path. You're like, is it a residual effect of what I was brought up believing?
That's what I was going to ask next. Have you ever had pushback from people who are atheists trying to tell you that?
Yes, I actually have. They're like, well, have you just been indoctrinated? And I'm like, well, if I had been indoctrinated, I would still be a virgin, and I'm not. So,
right.
I mean, if I really was indoctrinated, I would not have even experimented at this point. And the fact that I have made me realize that, I'm not adhering to this strict belief. I want to see if it really has any impact on my life, but it really didn't. It really wasn't something I wanted to experience again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something that I quote a lot when we're talking about sexuality on the show is, I don't know if you're familiar with Daryl Ray.
Yes.
But he has a show called Secular Sexuality. It's a fantastic show. And
I actually approached him back in October about doing a show about sexuality. So
yeah, Daryl, if you're listening, make it happen. I don't think he listens. But
I email him again. So he wanted 2 people at least to do the show. So that's why
Gotcha. Well, because something that he talks about a lot is a lot of times people do leave behind their religion, but keep the things that they learned from their religion about sex and sexuality, and don't even necessarily realize that the two are connected. Mm-hmm. So I just that was kind of where I was going with that question, is if because I mean, obviously, I'm not one to challenge who you are, you know what I mean? That's why I'm asking questions and instead of making assumptions or anything like that. But, I have to wonder about that, about that journey and questioning, like, is this really a thing because I think it's supposed to be, or is this really a thing? Like, I can imagine that being kind of a conflict.
No, I have asked myself for 6 years. Again, I realized I was atheist by about 2000, 2001. So I've been atheist for 15, 16 years almost.
Yeah.
And openly atheist. And I kept thinking, like, is my lack of sex drive, my lack of wanting to do this, just having this ideal of a virgin held up to me as a kid? Mm-hmm. And I realized, and it took me like 5 or 6 years to realize, no, you actually just have an orientation that is, kind of along these spectrums. Like, some people want to look at it as part of the LGBT community. And it really is a normal thing. Mm-hmm. So it did take a number of years after my leaving religion to understand that what I was feeling about myself, my own sexuality, was not necessarily derived from that.
Gotcha. So, Isabelle, tell me about your experience. Did you have a religious upbringing that complicated this whole journey for you?
No, not at all. Always an atheist.
Gotcha.
I learned a bit about religion when I was a kid, and I thought that wasn't making any sense. Like, an invisible person that's everywhere, looks at you all the time, even when you're in the bathroom. No, that wasn't making any sense to me.
Gotcha. Fair enough. I think it's so interesting. Well, and so let me ask you this: Do you think, because you did talk about, thinking for such a long time that this was something. I don't know if you necessarily went as far as saying you felt like something was wrong with you, but
that's how I felt.
Okay.
Something was wrong with me.
Okay. And so do you think those, I mean, do you see that attitude as coming from a religious influence externally? At least, I mean, if you didn't have a religious upbringing, I mean, obviously so much of what our culture thinks as far as sexuality is informed like that. Do you see those attitudes being informed by religion, even if it wasn't necessarily a thing that was forced on you as a kid? Does that make sense?
I'm pretty sure for some people it's the case. I'm sure some people have issues and it's related to religious upbringing. I'm pretty sure. I cannot say if, I don't think there's a lot of it, but yeah, maybe some people.
Yeah, we keep forgetting that you're from Canada, which is a perfect progressive social justice paradise.
Yeah, right.
So.
And the French part of Canada, right? So.
Exactly, even better. So I'll throw this question out to both of you, whoever wants to chime in first. So we've had a lot of questions coming from me, someone who is very very interested in being an ally and supporting folks who identify this way and being who they are and being able to be who they are. But that being said, asexuality is not my experience. It's very much not my experience. I'm a very sexual person. So there's a lot of this that I'm just plain going to be ignorant about. So one thing that I always like to do is to just kind of throw the floor out to the guests and say, hey, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important that I might not even think of?
I think it would be important to say that scientists realize that there's asexuality in the animal kingdom as well. Like, I think it's 12% of rats are asexual, and sheep, there's asexual sheep. So
that brings up a really good point, because I would imagine if there are people who are skeptical of asexuality in the same way that they're skeptical of homosexuality or any form of queer, sexual orientation, that you have to hear the biological argument a lot. Like,
oh yeah,
how's the species going to survive? Stuff like that. Like, is that stuff that you hear pretty often?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. And all I have to say is there are plenty of fundamentalist Christian families like the Duggars in our country in America who are making 20 babies. So, it's fine, I guess.
Right. Well, and that's, it's a silly argument, but it is a very silly argument, hence a silly answer. Right. I mean, it would be a problem if 98% of the human population all of a sudden just figured out that they're asexual. That might cause a problem, but if we're talking about 1% of the population, I think the future of the species is secure, guys. We can just go ahead and let people be who they are here, I think.
The thing is even if asexual, say there are asexual couples who are together who want to raise a child, who have that instinct, there are plenty of babies who want to be adopted. I know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's a difficult path. But if you really want it, and you're going to be a fantastic parent to that kid because you're going to really appreciate what you have.
Well, yeah, and I would even imagine that, if there was an asexual couple that really wanted to procreate, I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have sex. If you really want to have a kid, you can still do that.
If you care about that person who's your partner, you can make concessions. Hey, listen, it's a thing. Let's do this thing. But if it doesn't happen, there is always adoption as an option.
Absolutely. Jeni, did you have anything that you wanted to bring up specifically surrounding, stuff that we may not have mentioned yet that you think would be important to bring up?
As an homage to Mr. Darryl Ray, who I adore his podcast, I listen to it religiously as a pun.
Right, good.
I want to dispel the myths that asexuals have never masturbated or do not masturbate.
Right.
Because I actually discovered masturbation when I was in college, because I'm like, hey, can I actually give myself an orgasm? Can I actually do this?
Right.
And when I realized I could, I was like, oh, well, why would I need to actually be with anybody else? If I need to have this fulfilled, I can just freaking get a toy and do this thing. So,
okay.
I want to dispel that myth as well, that asexuals have never or do not masturbate.
Yeah. So let's explore that for a second, because that's fantastic, because that's something that I seriously never would have even thought of, because I associate masturbation with sexual pleasure and therefore sexuality and sexual attraction. So you're saying that those two things aren't necessarily connected. So if you want to feel that kind of physical pleasure, it's not that that masturbation is completely out. Like those two things are kind of separate ideas.
Well, in my mind, they are. It's like, well, I just wanted to see, hey, can I manage independently, because I'm such an independent-minded person, to be able to give myself an orgasm? And it was really empowering to realize that I could on my own. That I'm like, well, why would I even need a partner, like female or male? Like, wow.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to imagine that moment. Like, wow, yes, this is a thing that can happen.
I mean, I guess if you wanted to have me have a wow moment, it really wasn't like asexuality or atheism. It was like, whoa, I can actually give myself this experience and not be uncomfortable or have somebody like, I personally don't like being touched. I don't like the whole physical contact thing. Mm-hmm. So I can actually experience this thing and to not feel like I was, uncomfortable while doing it.
Huh. Okay. Well,
because sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was about to say, there's asexual who have a very high libido. Some have a very low libido. Some doesn't have any libido. So it has nothing to do with the sexual attraction towards someone. It's totally different, totally separated.
Okay, so being asexual doesn't necessarily mean a lack of libido. It just might mean that I just masturbate a lot instead of having sex with other people. Is that kind of what you mean by that, or?
Well, yeah, pretty much. There's a category of asexual who are. The old name was autochorisexuals. I think they have a new name now. I don't remember what is it. So they're turned on by sexual stories, by pornography. But if they try to do it with a partner, it doesn't work. It's like, no, sorry. But if they take care of it themselves, and so that's how they deal with it, and they're not interested at all into having sex with someone.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is, at least for some people, that asexuality is not even necessarily a complete lack of sexuality. It's just more a lack of sexual attraction to other people. So you can experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there can still be a broad sexual experience, but it's all within yourself as opposed to with a partner or partners.
Yes, and I mean, and for myself, I can't say it's excessive. It was more of like a thought experiment, because everything in my mind, I just like to try to prove things wrong.
Right.
I'm kind of one of those innate skeptics.
Yeah, that's healthy. I love it.
Can I do this myself? When I realized I could, it was like the discovery of a scientist going oh, you can experience this thing, but you really don't need to do it on a very frequent basis.
It's just comforting to know that you have that power for yourself whenever you want to exercise it, whether that's super often or every once in a while, just knowing that you can.
Without the involvement of another party.
Wow. That's cool. So, yeah, and that's, I would say that's probably, I fancy myself, to stay pretty educated, about experiences that aren't my own, and asexuality it's a new conversation. I feel like it's even newer than the conversation about trans people, and so I've tried to read up as much as possible, but that I didn't know. So that's I think that's great stuff.
One of the things, I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Like you had said, that asexuality is kind of newer to the conversation. I was watching the exact same documentary that was made with the founder of AVEN, and they were actually in a pride parade in San Francisco, and they were handing out flyers about asexuality, and people seemed to be like almost averse to them because they were all like, hey, this is my sexuality. I'm proud about sexuality. And they were automatically thinking that asexuals were almost like in their face, like kind of undermining their own sexuality. And like, and no, like I am fine. I am an LGBT ally. I am asexual, homoromantic, and like I would be totally on their side. But that's probably the thing that disturbed me the most about that documentary, is that they seem to be almost undermined. I mean, and I don't know what your opinion was about that when they were like, oh yeah, but I'm sexual and you're not. But aren't we on the same team?
Yeah, right. And do you remember that guy who was like, oh, I don't support you. I don't support what you stand for. It's like, what?
Exactly. That last part of that documentary really did kind of upset me. Because I've been involved with our local LGBT community since the late 90s, and they have been nothing but accepting.
So the idea is, it's almost like conservative religious people see queer sexuality as a threat to what we consider normal.
Yes.
And so the certain factions of the LGBT community turn around and look that way at people who are asexual and say, like, well, I've fought a very long time to be okay with my sexuality and be able to express my sexuality, and so you're now a threat to that. Is that kind of the attitude?
I guess it kind of was, because when I look back on how the documentary like actually portrayed it, it was like, well, you're anti our expressing our pride and our sexuality. And there was in no way they were. But I guess it was kind of perceived that way.
God, that's ridiculous.
But I never experienced that. So it was really shocking for me to see somebody who had.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously, we know the LGBT community, or the LGBT movement as a whole is not completely filled with saints. I mean, there are plenty of people who don't think that I should be a part of the movement either. So
the same thing is with LGBTQA as ally, not asexual. So
right, yeah. Oh, that makes me sad. I guess it's not surprising though.
You just have to accept it, move on, and be who you are, and be comfortable with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the whole idea is, I'm not trying to fight for it to be okay for who I am. I'm trying to fight for it to be okay for people to be who they are.
Everybody is.
I mean, I do the trans activism and the queer activism, because I think that's where my voice can have the most weight, because those are my experiences. But at the end of the day, I'm about everyone's right to be who they are and be able to be comfortable who they are, whatever that looks like, as long as you're not hurting anyone. And it's just, it's absolutely beyond the pale in my mind that someone saying, you know what, I don't experience sexuality, there's nothing wrong with that, it's just who I am. It is absolutely ridiculous to me that someone could see that as a threat, or say that that's something like, well, I don't support what you're saying. I get it on an intellectual level, because, I kind of understand where they're coming from. I just don't understand why people who have had to fight so long for their own existence to be validated and accepted, that they're going to turn around and do the exact same awful things to other people. It's really frustrating.
Yeah. What I also see sometimes on forums and stuff, there's people who feels like asexual judge them, like sexual people feels that asexual people judge them because they are having sex, because they are having frequent sex and kinky sex, and it's like, no, not at all. What are you talking about? Do whatever you want. It's great. Just don't force me to do it. Right?
So there's a perception that asexual people think they're better than sexual people in some corners, I guess.
Yeah, that's really, really silly. I don't get that.
Yeah, I kind of see that. I kind of see that conversation happen whenever people talk about polyamory, because I'm kind of like newly realized as a poly person, so I've been kind of exploring that, and I'm not the kind of poly person, like I don't like go out seeking multiple romantic relationships with different partners. I just recognize that I'm capable of having romantic and sexual feelings towards more than one person, and I'm okay with that. But there is a lot of back and forth over, and I have seen people who are poly sort of look down their nose at people who are monogamous and say like, well, I am so much more evolved than your silly monogamy, which I think is ridiculous. Yeah. So it's interesting that dynamic, exists here too, to some degree, whether it's, whether that perception is justified or not. It's interesting that perception even exists.
And I think that it goes back to that whole misconception that I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, that people think that asexuals are prudes.
Right.
They're either virgins or prudes, and they're really not open to anything else.
We're not prudes at all.
Well, right.
Absolutely.
and it comes back to the
13. I could be dropping a lot of very dirty jokes, but
right. Well, and I think it comes back to the idea that we attach these labels to ourselves because it's important for us to understand who we are, but we also don't have to tolerate people putting boxes around us because of those labels. And you can say, well, I identify myself as an asexual person because I don't experience sexual attraction to other people. That doesn't have to mean literally anything other than that.
Yeah.
It can, and maybe you can infer certain things because there are similarities in experience across, if people grow up with that experience in the same culture, you're going to run into the same attitudes and the same silly arguments. So, you can kind of infer things about what experiences a person may have, but generally speaking, you're not going to be able to say, okay, you're asexual, therefore you are also A, B, and C. And it's really silly to me that it's so hard for people to get that concept sometimes.
But it's the same way for so many different orientations. There's just so many different things. Like even atheist or pantheist or things like that too.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I have learned a lot, and I sincerely hope that the listeners have too. Isabelle, did you have anything before we go? Anything that you wanted to promote? Your podcast, a charity, anything like that?
Well, yeah, my podcast, Moi Asexuel, and also Le Monde Merveilleux du Scepticisme for your French listeners, because it's all in French. So you can find me on iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, Isabelle Stephen. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And Jeni, what about you? Did you have anything you want to promote or want to let people know how they can find out more about you or get in contact with you?
Well, I can be found on Twitter at AtheAce. Athe and then ACE, which is a very typical abbreviation for asexual, AtheAce. And I am also very involved with Lehigh Valley Gay Men's Chorus. If you are in the eastern or southeastern Pennsylvania region, check out Lehigh Valley Gay Men's Chorus. We're really awesome. We're going on our 22nd year of providing musical entertainment to Lehigh Valley from an equality perspective. And also Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center in the Lehigh Valley as well. They'll be looking to do a grand opening this coming spring for LGBT-friendly, not only community events, but also healthcare services as well. So if you want to put them in the show notes, I will give you their information as well.
Yeah, please do. Shoot that info over, and I will stick it in the show notes. Jeni, Isabelle, thank you both so much for taking the time out to be on the show and explain this stuff. I think this is a super important conversation to be having, and I appreciate you both being so willing and open to talk about everything here.
Well, thanks to you. It was great. Really had a great time.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, Callie. What you're doing here, I know is appreciated by so many more people than you realize. You're doing a very important piece of work.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Again, I want to thank my guests, Jeni and Isabelle, for their time. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. If you want to support the work we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a per episode donation to support the production of the show and the real life activism that I do. If that's not doable, you can go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating to help us get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, You need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.